And I'm happy to introduce Benjamin Mengistu Navet. He studied fashion design at La Cambre in Brussels, and he completed his education with a master in textile design in Ghent. And his master thesis he wrote on the topic of post-decolonial practices, conversations about fashion and textiles in the post-colonial world. So his main focus lies on creating a dialogue between industry and craftsmanship, and he wants to question the production processes of objects in a very broad sense. He's basing his work on research in post-colonial practices in the field of fashion and textiles, and currently he's investigating his own Ethiopian background. He does that research through pattern making and garment creation, combining traditional techniques and the industry. So I'm very curious what Benjamin will show us, and as we see here, it has to do a lot with pattern making. Maybe we can start with that, but the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you Meret for this introduction. Thank you for being here tonight. So before starting with the TaDA project, I would like to tell you a little bit more about my background, especially with highlighting certain points that I had an important influence on what I did here for TaDA. So I will start first with a project that I did last year called Patterning. It's a project where I am trying to create a conversation between industry and craftsmanship. And then, as Meret mentioned, I will talk a little bit about research on post- and decoloniality practices in the field of fashion and textile design. That brought me to be invited to write an article on my own identity and my practice regarding this question. And then two other different projects where you will see how I am experiencing this question of textile and pattern creation applied to different domains. And then a last experience where I am experiencing textile creation in the context of a fashion house. So patterning was a project that I did during 2 years. This project is a project where I am trying to create a conversation between industry and craftsmanship. I did a master specialized in industrial weaving in Ghent, in Flanders, Belgium. So at the end of this pattern research, I had the envy to rework on those jacquard weaving by reinterpreting them by hand dyeing process. So thanks to this work, I'm inviting the visitors to be completely immersed in a pattern installation. And thanks to the hand dyeing process, we have this kind of deepness in the pattern and in the image that I wanted to show. So, fascinated by the travel of patterns in history, I had realized that textiles are always embodying European colonial pasts. So, for example, I was fascinated when I started to study textile to this history of Dutch wax that is coming from Holland and then transported into West Africa. But also, for example, the history of the cashmere pattern that is coming from India and then brought to England, and then had also huge trends in America, for example. So I wrote my master thesis about this subject, but I realized that I was also surrounded by people that were feeling these international exchanges in their own practice. So I came to interview few young designers and artists that were experiencing this feeling of post-coloniality or decoloniality in their own practice. And then I was last year invited to write an article about my own practice regarding this question of experiencing my own identity as an Ethiopian native adopted in France. And then I wanted to present you two projects that had a huge influence of what I did for the TaDA residency. The first project is in continuation with this discussion with industry and craftsmanship. It's a project that I did with a designer called Raphaël Bosmans from Belgium. So we worked on refurbishing chairs that are coming from a Hollandic designer, Cis Brackman. So with the same idea of creating patterns with industrial jacquard weaving looms, we decided to dye the fabric in order to refurbish the chairs. And the second project is a project where I was invited to create a pattern for the magazine called Artist Network Theory that is led by the Swiss artist Axel Stiefel. And for this magazine, she invited me to create a pattern that will be in the magazine to cut the different articles. So for me, experiencing textiles is something that I love applying to different kind of domain, which is fashion that you will see, but also furniture design or graphic design. The last few months before going to TaDA, I had the chance to being part for a few months of the Maison Margiela knitwear studio in Paris. And then there I also experiencing textiles with doing a lot of hand dyeing, hand knitted samples, but also I've been also being confronted to the fashion industry. So it was some experimentation with textiles, but also some very more practical translation into the industry. So now we are going to talk about my project that I did at TaDA. So first, I would like to introduce this project with a little view of the studio. And we will talk about the relation that I am into between industry and craftsmanship and how I experience it here. And then I would like to introduce some projects that I did here that were taken from my personal archive as a new kind of process. Then we will talk a little bit about relations or happy conversation between mechanical, digital, and manual, so conversation between techniques. And then garment research that I did because the project for TaDA was to create textile and develop textile in order to create my next fashion collection. So here you can see a studio view. I wanted to show you some picture like that because for me it's a little bit, it can show you how I am processing. So you can see on this image some hand dyeing that I did here, and then some hand knitted process that I did with companies leftover Tisca and Lobra. And then some experimentation with digital printing that I did with Lobra. On this studio view, you can see some pattern research that I did regarding my French name and Ethiopian name. It's a project that I developed here with TaDA. And then also from my personal archive, a project that I did at Spinnerei with Manuel that you will discover. Here you can see some inspirational image that we will discover together. And here drawings that I did at the first step of an inspiration. And the last image of this chapter is the development that I did with TaDA. So you can see here different sides of my weavings, and here a little image where you see different trials. So, industrial craftsmanship, another way of producing from industrial waste to hand knitting. My practice as a fashion/textile designer has been always linked with companies since a long time. I've been always inspired by the machines and the people that are working in the factories. They are most of the time extremely linked to the development of my projects. Thank you, Martin. In the sense that when I am going to a company, I always have some ideas, but they are always not super clear in order to really let the discussion begin inside the company. And of course, it helps me to being open to any kind of surprises. So on the sample that you can see here, yeah, here is the image. So you have to imagine that when I came to TaDA, it's an industrial weaving company, that the weaving loom has two sides of leftovers that are automatically cutted from the looms. And then you have those big bags in white that are standing in front of the different looms. I had directly kept directly my attention into a white bag that was made of leftover in pure wool. So I started to discuss with the workers there, and I discovered they told me that it wasn't possible to reuse it using these leftovers directly on some looms, because it's not so solid and it's a lot of threads. So I asked them kindly to take all of those leftovers, and they kept it for me like for weeks and weeks. So now I have a huge bag. And the idea came with trying to make something, but trying to make something handmade. So immediately I had this idea to create some hand-knitted samples. What I really liked with this experimentation is this idea to having this pure virgin wool that is used for TaDA carpets that are coming from a ship, that are transformed industrially, and then with this action of knitting, I like this idea of rediscovering the feeling of touching or smelling a sheep, because it smelled sheep. So yeah, it's helped me to continue this joyful conversation between craftsmanship, industry, and then going back into something more natural. Here a picture from Ladina Bischoff, where you can see me trying to start to work also with garments. Another kind of hand knitting process that I did at Lobra. So Lobra is a company that had a lot of leftovers made in plastics. So at the end of the machines, you have a lot of these ribbons. And then I also decided to knit them. So for the moment, it's in-process research, and I am more thinking about making accessory with it, because the material that we have at the end is quite thick, so it will be obviously not soft as the sheep sample that I showed you. Personal archive, a new kind of process. So regarding to those last researches about post or decoloniality on textile and fashion, we will explore in this chapter how I am integrate elements of my Ethiopian roots, but also elements specifically linked to my adoption in my textile research, and how they are at the heart of the developments that I did here at TaDA. This image is coming from 1999. It's taken by my parents in an Ethiopian New Year's year celebration in Lyon, in France. So traditional Ethiopian fabrics are mainly woven with a very thin cotton yarns. You can, thank you, Martin. Here there is a sample of a scarf that is coming from Ethiopia. I was directly intrigued by the woman at the center that is wearing a dress with some fringes on it. I like fringes because it's giving a certain movement to the fabric. And then my envy to collaborate with company TaDA started with this image and this idea of creating a research about fringes, but made industrially at TaDA. So on this page, you can see different steps of this research. On the first image, it's a pattern research that I did with my different names. Ethiopia have this particularity to still have its own alphabet. So I came at TaDA with this idea to create a double-faced, thank you so much, a double-faced fabric. So on one side, you will have this conversation between my different names, and on the other side, you can see the different interpretation that I was doing with the fringes. Here you can see a yarn selection. For me, it was the first time that I was really trying to get concentrated with a color card, for example, because on my last project patterning, it was a little bit more instinctive. I was just going through colors to another one, so it was the first step for me to try to structure a little bit more. And here you can see the loom in action that is weaving this sample. On this page, you can see three different images. The first one is the loom in action. The second one shows very well the process. So you have to imagine that with TaDA, so we are trying different combination of patterns, and then the last image is about cutting, because the weaving at the end of the loom is not cutted. So after, I am choosing where I want to cut, which is also give me a lot of freedom in the rendition of the textile. And on this image, you can see obviously the two different sides of the fabric. So one side with this pattern research, and the other side with those yarns that are not already cutted. I also, through pattern research, I also added some other aspects of my Ethiopian past. As an adoptee, the only link that you have with your original country is a very, sometimes, yeah, a big dossier, a big file full of administrative patterns that are linked to the different governments. I've been always intrigued when I was a child by the cohabitation of the stems with the Amharic alphabet, which is the Ethiopian alphabet, the Latin words, the signatures that are finally the testimony of different travels between courts, translations, offices, etc., before going to France. So I just took some graphical elements that I really liked, and I had this idea to create this print. The idea to make a square came in reference to Western fashion square scarf that you can find in high fashion or also in Italy. And for me, this is something that I really like with fashion, is this ability to translate some elements to another field. And for sure, for me, those big square silk scarves are kind of an emblem of Parisian or Italian fashion houses. And then I had the chance to discover the amazing workshops at Spinnerei at Seiterwerk. We met Manuel, and I decided to work with him also with with a pattern research that has directly started with an administrative document. So here you can see the administrative document that is coming from my adoption dossier. And then we decided to engrave it in metal because I arrived meeting him with this idea. So my project for this little project is to do a hand-knitted pullover. And we will start to cut different pieces, a little bit as you can see on the scarf, in order to make some pearls and to integrate it in the knitting. So here you can see an example of what Manuel did with those metal plates. So it's really the first step of research that will be still continuing. Mechanical, digital, manual, conversation between techniques. So as you probably see before at Textildruckerei, I started to work with Martin Schlegel on a print. It's a print that is digitally made, and for continuing this conversation between digital and mechanical, it's a print made of a mechanical knitted sample that I translated digitally. So here you can see the print that is here printed at Lobra. And this image from Ladina that I pretty much like because you can see on this image a modification of this pattern that is coming directly from some hand-dyed samples that I did. So it's always, I also like to mix completely different techniques in order to create my prints. So here it's a page that is highlighting the preparation of the screens that I did with Textildruckerei with Martin. So the thing that was interesting for me was to try to start with this digital pattern and then trying to deconstruct it, because as you know, screen printing is working with different screens and each screen is one color. So here you can see the first step, and here the translation that I did, because here it's a square and we have to put it in repeat in order to have an infinite pattern. Here it's the first step of the first layer that we did last week. And here an image in the making. So you can see in red the second layer that will arrive on the first layer. The thing that I really liked at Martin's place was that you are in a place that is really in between craftsmanship and industry. It's not as you are arriving with an idea and you make it automatically. It's like you are arriving with an image, and after you can still modify the mechanical process in order to let some experimentation going while you are printing. And this is also, for me, this idea of tension between serial and unique pieces. So the last chapter is the beginning of the garment research that I did during my TaDA residency. While I was collaborating with companies, I was also making the first shapes research on coats or shirts, for example. And here it's a mosaic of different research, and it shows where I am right now. So you can see some images where the pattern is entering in a conversation with the shapes of the garments. Also some prints that are simply draped on a body. And yes, I think it's the expression of yes, the way of how I love working. So here is the list of the different partnerships. So I would like to thank you, all the partners of my projects. They always have been present from 6 in the morning until very, very much late in the night. So thank you to all of them, especially Martin that is here. And also even some weekends, so it was great to really have people and teams in the companies that were really with us to developing our ideas. So at TISCA, I had the pleasure to work especially with Claudia Mill and supervised by Dominika Tischhauser. It was a great experience because I was warmly welcomed in their company, so I even had a desk to work there with them, with the companies. So I had the chance to really experience and to meet a lot of different workers there. I would like also to thank Barbara Smith from Lobra. It was a great place to work there because she also welcomed us very warmly. So sometimes we could just arriving and working on an afternoon directly in the company, which is quite rare. And then, of course, Martin Schlegel from Textildruckerei, where I had the chance to experience everything that I wanted to in order to create this print, and also Linda. Then I would also like to thank Manuel from Siteorwerk, because for me it was a completely new experience to experience my patterns on metal, so it's still an ongoing project, but I think it was also the goal of this residency to discover a lot of different techniques. Thank you to the Textile Museum because I passed a lot of time in their very much inspiring library. Thank you to Martin Leuthold for sharing his experience and knowledge. Thank you to Scholler for their gifts as a fabric. And also thank you Rigotex because I'm still working on a project with them that you will discover very soon. And I would like, of course, like to thank Marianne Bourki and Martina Lugui, and also Andrea Winkler and Sonia Lee. Thank you.
So thank you so much for presenting all these materials. It was always so nice to touch it and to have a more in-depth feeling of what you were doing. You told me that your bachelor at La Cambre was very much focused on garments and how to shape the body with garments or with clothing. But you always liked to do textiles, you told me, and your master in textile design was in fact, I guess, the way to go deeper into textile design. Looking back, what do you think? Are you more a textile designer or are you still very much a fashion designer?
Thank you for this question. I think I'm more considering myself as a textile designer who likes to work in different fields. So, for example, I always love choosing when I'm working on a project, I'm always thinking about the message that I want to transmit. And for example, for this, it was obviously fashion because it has this huge link between embodying stories and embodying narratives. Mm-hmm. But for example, I'm also very happy to work with, for example, the project that I showed you before. So with graphic designers or also designers. So yeah, it's really depending on the project.
Okay, so I really like your way to express or your research you do in coming up with a meaningful and somehow maybe also symbolic meaning of garments in a way. So could you tell us a bit more about your research process into colonialism, into post-colonial debates? How did it translate to the textile design? Was it really the patterning issue, or did it go further with the history of this colonial thinking we are so easily trapped in, especially in Europe?
I think for the beginning, when I started to do my master thesis, for example, I had the chance to have some very great seminars in Flanders about the history of the colonial past of Belgium. And then I immediately thought that I really wanted to make something about this subject, but it's a huge subject with a lot of different issues that has been already treated a lot of time. So that's why I decided to just starting from myself and trying to make these interviews of people that are around my generation, more or less, and that are experiencing this post-colonial experience through their work. Mm-hmm. So, for example, there was a friend of mine that is a textile designer, and she's been working between Brussels and the Benin since a lot of years. Another one that is a fashion designer, and for making his collection, it was he was working between Mali and Belgium, and another artist that was working into different places in the world. Mm-hmm. So I think it was my first step into this subject, and then I was immediately thinking about my own history as an adopted child, but also as the history of my family in France, because in France we also have a huge colonial past, and it have obviously touched in a way my family. And yeah, so I think it was a little bit step by step that I arrived to this subject.
Okay. How or what did you learn going more deeply into these different techniques you had the chance to work with? Did you learn new technologies now in this residency, or was it more like trying to use these technologies in a different way?
I think it was more trying to use these technologies in a different way. For example, I had the chance to work with TaDA quite intensively, and for me it was quite interesting to challenge in a way their way of seeing fabrics, because it's not really used for them to make this kind of double-faced fabric with fringes and all this very experimental work. So for me, this the main goal of this residency was really to try to develop ideas with industries. And yes, I had the chance to really discover the work field of this company, for example.
Yeah, because I'm asking you as a trained textile designer, so I was wondering, what did this residency give new to you? So, but you just explained it. So you tried to come closer to this question of how could we expand technologies, how could we go further in this in experimenting with technologies. Yeah.
I also think, just for adding something, I also think that it's a rare opportunity as a young designer to be able to work in this kind of industries, because if I couldn't be there, I couldn't just say, hi, I want to develop a project with you. It's kind of complicated, so for me it was also the main goal of being there, just to develop and having the chance to develop and taking the time to develop these kind of things, because also as a normal client, if you go to a company, everything is costing a lot of money, so you have to be straight to the point to your idea. So with this residency, I had the chance to really take the time to experiment everything.
Okay, this reminds me what Andrea told me in the conversation we had before. You said something like, this was like a candy store. I was just able to go into anything and keep or pull everything out of it. And same to you?
Exactly, but also I was quite surprised that I think, for example, still speaking with TaDA, it was very challenging also for them, because we tried to figure out some technical issues to have this rendition of fringes. Because, for example, if you want to weave some fringes, sometimes the thread doesn't stay. So we had to figure out all those technical technical questions, and also because I want at the end to do garments with it. So it was also another step and another level of
so you didn't
research.
Stick to the experiment you wanted to do, or you wanted to have garments in the end, as you just said. So how will you proceed from now? What is the next steps?
The next step will be to develop this garment research regarding all of the quite huge amount of textiles that I had here. I had the chance to go further with Lobra and TaDA, so they offered me the possibility to have some trials made in quite of I had few meters.
Okay.
So
you have now the material. Now it's for the collection, is it?
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Benjamin.
Thank you.
Thank you all of you for these insights. I think we all profited very much from this look into your really special works you did, and we all hope to see some more in the future. I guess we'll now have a break, and I hand over to Marianne. Okay.
Thank you so much, all of you, Sonja, Andrea, and Benjamin. Also for me, I discover now every time something new. It's really wonderful, and you did a lot of hard work. And thank you, Martin Leutold, again, for your support that you are always giving to the residents. And we have three firms, three partner firms who are here. So Martin Schlegel, thank you as well. You have been here already. From Textildruckerei. We have René Rossi from EMPA, who is always very open to the help. And also Peter Trinkel from Saurer AG, who has been always very generously. And also thank you to Saurer Museum. We have Hans Stacher here, so thank you so much for everything. So we will have a short break. There is coffee, tea, some cookies, so I think about 10 minutes break. We will change now the setting a little bit for the round table, which is to follow, where we will talk about the big themes of trends, mega trends, how do we deal with that, so a change of theme. And then we will still have a very nice ending of the evening with a performance by Selina Reiterer and Oliver Macklot. So you might have also noticed already the carpet in the background there, so we are also looking forward to have this. And then last but not least, stay with us long, because we will have an apéro riche, and so there will be also food and drinks, and we can exchange further on what we have heard. So for the moment, a small break of about 10 minutes, and I see you here again later on. Thank you.
That was mine.